behalf of the Women and Girls Fund, we're so delighted for this evening. One of our founding members long ago had said how important it is for us as the Women and Girls Fund to engage with our community and with our agencies. And our agency executives have the pulse of our community, and that's why we're here this evening to do that. So we're going to start with introductions. I hope all of you knew that woman who was speaking in the mic before is Nicole Wagner, the Executive Director of the Women and Girls Fund. My name is Carrie Stupek. I have been the board chair of the Women and Girls Fund board since about 2023. So it is my pleasure to be your moderator this evening, and I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, your name and organization, how long you've been with your organization, and could you also say what population you serve that is female?
Oh, there we go. Okay. We'll have feedback if I talk too. Oh, we do have feedback.
Yeah, maybe just turn it. One of them.
Okay.
Whoopsie. Okay, I have a really nice voice that projects. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, then maybe I just won't, and please don't be shy about saying that you can't. But usually if I'm on a microphone, I'm holding it down here so that I'm not blowing out people's ears. So we're just gonna try it, at least for me, without it. My name is Mary Madden, and I am the Executive Director of NAMI Southeast Wisconsin. I started at NAMI about 16 and a half years ago, and in 2008 it was NAMI Waukesha, and then in January of 2021, kind of in the middle of a pandemic, we decided to merge with NAMI Greater Milwaukee, really because NAMI Greater Milwaukee was struggling, and we were in such close proximity. We were sharing, people that we served anyways, and so that's when we became NAMI Southeast Wisconsin, and we also work with individuals in Jefferson County. Our focus is working with people who are impacted by mental health conditions. We are what is known as a family and peer-run organization, which means that everybody who works with us, everybody who volunteers with us has personal lived experience. And so there's actually been a number of programs that the Women and Girls Fund has helped us to get off the ground in Waukesha County, starting with peer support in 2015. We didn't have that. And some things I'll talk about a little bit later, but really the grant opportunities that we've had from Women and Girls Fund has helped women and girls either who have a family member impacted or as they themselves are impacted by a mental health condition to learn more about that condition, to understand how to seek intervention for it, and to have the resources that they need.
I was a cheerleader, so I can also be very loud. And so, same as Mary, if you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm Angela Mancuso. I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Center. We work with adult and child survivors of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking here in Waukesha and really the greater Milwaukee community. And within that population is, obviously our name. So women and girls are still today the most prevalent population that is victimized by those 4 crimes. However, we do have we do work with young men, adult males, etc. Anybody who has been exposed to, experienced, or witnessed any of those crimes, we are working with.
And good afternoon. My name is Anna Simpson, and I'm the CEO of Girl Scouts of Wisconsin Southeast. I was not a cheerleader, but I was a Girl Scout troop leader, and I love kids. So Girl Scouts of Wisconsin Southeast covers the 7 counties in Southeast Wisconsin, and girls are in our name, so that tells you the percentage of our population that we serve that are female. And I've been there for the last year and a half.
Great.
Okay, and I was an 8th grade cheerleader and a Girl Scout, so we're all set. We're gonna do it. So, all right. So when we put this panel together, I think we feel that all of us in this room are familiar with these 3 organizations. There's a high name recognition, and I feel that all of us collectively might believe that we understand the mission and why these organizations exist. But this evening we want to go a bit deeper. So, Mary, just to start with you, just could you tell us through your tenure or in the last years, the challenges, how have your challenges evolved?
Sure, thank you. So, really, if I look at kind of, the time, the entirety of the time that I've been at NAMI, really what we started seeing things evolve, especially for young girls and mothers around the pandemic time. And I think, if there is a silver lining to the pandemic, the silver lining is that it cast a huge spotlight on mental health issues. The not so great part of the pandemic is, and every single person in this room dealt with it, is we all dealt with a lockdown. We had parents who suddenly had to be homeschooling their children and trying to work from home, or we had people who were essential workers that had to, go out and continue to work while their children had to be at home. So, we all that was something we all dealt with collectively. But what we really saw was an increase in and what we are still seeing is an increase in anxiety. We've heard a number of people are starting to refer to this generation as the anxious generation. People have probably heard that. I don't like that terminology because, when you start referring to a group of people by a term, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So, but, there was such an uptick. Social media was already an issue, but during the pandemic, there was such an uptick in the use of electronic means of communication. And, one of the things as we've looked at, especially some of the issues that our school age girls are dealing with is, those social pressures, this feeling that, everybody on social media is perfect. There's always been the pressure on young girls and women about the way they look, the way they act, all of those things. But it really started occurring to me that, in my generation, if you were dealing with these things at school, you were dealing with them at school, whether you were getting, if you were getting bullied or you just weren't feeling like you were part of the in crowd. When you went home was always a safe space where that couldn't touch you. And it's not anymore because there's that constant draw to that social media, presence or those online communications, texting and all of that. They no longer have this safe space to come back to. So, we talked a little bit right before we started about statistics, right? We don't have statistics right now because statistics are usually 5 years later. But as the statistics come out, I think, again, anecdotally, this is what we're going to be seeing, these additional pressures that were put on women and girls throughout the pandemic that are still kind of, holdovers now that they're dealing with.
So I've been with the Women's Center 11 years, so I would say a lot has changed. I mean, our physical footprint has changed, for example, and that was purely because of demand. But aside from the pandemic, which I'll get to, one big change that we've made consistently year over year is safety. When I started at the Women's Center, we might have had just probably under 10 cameras. For example, we have 60 cameras now. We have them on all of our transitional living houses. We have them inside, outside the building, on the perimeter. And again, our footprint has expanded, so we have more security. We have to do active shooter training with our staff every year. And we have, for example, our client waiting room now has bullet-resistant glass and Kevlar walls. And these are things that we didn't spend a lot of, I mean, this is expensive stuff too, is on a whim, anything that we do is generally the result of a trend, a negative trend, right? So we have abusers, pimps, traffickers coming to the Women's Center, threatening staff, threatening their victims. So that's, to me, when I was really reflecting on this question, that's a big one. And then I agree with the pandemic. So for us, we had, children were trapped at home with their perpetrator or their abuser. In school, or Girl Scouts, or any after-school activity, weekend activity was taken away. So they were literally trapped with their perpetrator and their abuser. And the same with victims of domestic violence or trafficking. There was no outlet. And I would say in 2020, 2021, get a lot of questions like, have you just seen your numbers, through the roof? And it was like, no, increase-ish, but the needs were different, right? Because at the time it was more about, not about their trauma crisis, it was about, can I get diapers? Can I get some toilet paper? Basic needs, things like that. But I had always said, trauma, sexual violence, domestic violence, child abuse, that trauma doesn't always manifest immediately. So I said, catch me in, 2 to 3, 4 years. And I could tell you that 2024 was a real intense year for client population. So each year we were, after COVID, we were seeing it grow a little bit, but then it just, 2024 blew up. Children and adults, and I really think it's because the impact of safe at home orders and everything that, with COVID and the pandemic. So that was, and that has forced us, because needs are different, trauma is actually different, or how people are expressing their trauma. So we just have to be super flexible and constantly adapt and adjust. And I think that's been also a change over my 11 years.
So I'll speak for my year-and-a-half tenure. However, we're an institution that's been around, even in this community, since 1917. So over 100 years of history, and just kind of seeing all of the different iterations of what Girl Scouting looks like in a community. I think for us, we probably are one of the most recognizable brands globally, whether it's Girl Scouts in the US or Girl Guides in other countries. However, we're probably one of the most misunderstood brands, because the brand has been allowed to evolve and create a life of its own. When I have conversations with folks and I ask them about Girl Scouting, their first response is to talk about the Oh, you're wrong. 99% of the people say cookies. But thank you for that. And which it's an iconic program. It's obviously, it's one of our core pillars to teach entrepreneurship and financial literacy to our girls, and it's done through this program. However, at the end of the day, what folks aren't focusing on is that Girl Scouting is a unique opportunity that is creating future leaders. I mean, even in this room itself, how many of the women were Girl Scouts at some point in their, and how many of you feel that at some point during that tenure that you learned some valuable leadership skills that you took with you for the rest of your life, right? Those are the conversations that we're not having. How many of you have heard of an Eagle Scout? Okay. How many of you have heard of a Gold Award recipient? So that was 4 hands. 5. Gold Award recipient is the equivalent of an Eagle Scout, but yet it is not a household name like an Eagle Scout is. So we can go into the reasons as to why is that, but at the end of the day, there's even federal recognition. If you join the military as an Eagle Scout or a Gold Award recipient, you go into the military at a higher rank. But yet, no one knows what a Gold Award Girl Scout is, and obviously those young women have earned the right for people to know that. And so for me, and I will say I have, we definitely have seen the reports and have faced similar things, but I don't want to reiterate. We're actually working on a State of the Girl report statewide between myself and my counterparts statewide, and we're going to have data that's broken down by county by the end of the year Nicole's smiling because I've talked to her about this. So I think that that will be interesting to look at that young woman perspectives throughout the entire state. But kind of shifting back to where I was, one of the things that I'm really trying to do is partnering with higher education institutions, with corporations, with our government, so that they're leaning in closer to Girl Scouts, because for me, our 13,000 girls, that's this community's pipeline to our future voters, our future students, our future workforce, and our future leaders.
I was negligent in stating that y'all have note paper in front of you. All this fascinating and provocative information being forwarded. We want to wait for our Q&A until after, but please write your questions down for our panel, and we will get back to that. Just to follow up on some things we said, and again for our audience, I think you know that the Women and Girls Fund has been distributing grants for our entire.
Gary, excuse me, can you go back to using the mic? There's
The air.
Oh,
you're
okay.
hearing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you need all of us
Thanks,
to,
Jane.
or, I know Carrie's a little,
Back?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was okay, but there's some.
Okay.
There's some-
stuff like.
Don't want to compete. Okay, what I was saying was, and thanks, Jane, I appreciate that. Since our inception, the Women and Girls Fund has awarded more than $1.8 million in grants to approximately 70 agencies. And Nicole had shared how often these three organizations have been a part of that, but it has been very widespread. And as Mary was saying, statistics are very challenging because we receive them late. But our agencies, through the applications that they give us for the grants, do provide us with trends and statistics that are quite troubling and startling. One recently was discussing how young women and girls are describing themselves as sad, hopeless, and lacking in confidence. And not only have these percentages increased of the young women who are responding that way, but the trend is going younger and younger for the young girls who are now using those descriptives. And curious, and Anna, if I could start with you, are those the challenges you also see, or from a Girl Scout perspective, what are the challenges that you see the young women today facing?
All right, any feedback?
Can we pass
Yeah,
the
maybe
same
mine
mic?
is just
Maybe just
bad.
pass the same mic. Sure. There we go.
yeah.
Oh, no.
Hello? Okay. So, ironically enough, our mission is to build girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a better place. So thank you for the tee up. But I will say that we have, obviously, we collect our own data, have done several reports, and have found the same statistics that you're sharing. We've actually seen that suicide rates in females is increasing as well. And again, to your point, the troubling statistic is that that is younger and younger, that girls are having body image issues, or all of the things that you mentioned. And you're right, sometimes data is tricky because it's a lagging indicator, right? But I can't help but to think that with access to Instagram and social media and all the things, it's this comparison to this maybe false narrative, right? That isn't helping our girls with that. So what I will say in terms of how how this impacts us, for me, Girl Scouting is important when I think about those leadership opportunities for the older girls, but for the younger girls, Girl Scouting to me is important because it is building that strong foundation of learning how to fail and be okay with failing fast, and doing it in a safe space where no one is judging you, but yet we're encouraging you to do the thing that you wouldn't do otherwise, right? And do it in a space where you can just be silly and courageous in all of the things, whether it's learning how to fish, whether it's building a fire, whether it's doing a STEM activity, that there isn't this competition that you have in other spaces. And so for us, building that courage, confidence, and character is our mission, but it really is at the core of everything that we do.
Do you want to answer to that, Angela, or do you have a follow-up? If not,
I feel like I'm gonna be the Debbie Downer of the group. I mean, the trends that we're seeing with, I guess, the youth, would span everything that you said, everything you're about to say, and what you had said, and but for us, it's not new. It's not a change. It's not a trend. It's not anything new. We've been around since 1977, and when it comes to again, the violence and the trauma that we're addressing with adults and children, how that again manifests itself is very unique to each person. But I will say, like what you were talking about with social media and body image, of course, with really the internet, the advent of the internet, that just created a fantastic platform for more violence against women and girls. And so we deal a lot with revenge porn, social media hacking, creating sites, a lot of solicitation, I guess, really the sexual solicitation, things like that. And now with the advent, this actually just drives me crazy and keeps me up at night. Every week it seems like there's a brand new app that is really designed for stalking, just to make it easier for stalking. And I will say that, I guess I correct myself, a trend that we have seen, I've been in this field for 24 years, so I could say over the course of that, the trend of stalking and being younger and younger has definitely kicked off in the last couple of years. So, and I don't necessarily have the stats that we're seeing off the top of our head, but I would say anything that's happening socially will have an impact on victims and survivors, so if it is a social media craze, if it's, 2020 and TikTok, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of prank calls to our hotline that were basically threatening to rape our staff. It was just ongoing. We went all over the news. I had to get a law firm to help us. we had to push TikTok really hard. It was so time consuming, and the calls were so frequent that it was blocking all of our inbound lines, 7 inbound lines. And it was 2020, it was like kids were at home bored. We did actually start tracing those phone calls and calling local police departments and things like that. But even that trend, there are social media trends that are really dark and negative and very harmful to women and girls. So, and I probably could come up with a bunch more, but I'll pass it to Mary.
Well, and so not to be repetitive, but also to say, when I'm not so sure that the issues for girls especially and women were that much different, back I got into the field in the 1980s. We didn't talk about it then, though. And so, in the 1980s and the 1990s, most of the service delivery system for mental health issues waited until somebody was in full-blown psychosis before they started treatment. That's like waiting until somebody has stage 4 cancer. And now you're trying to chase some stability for this person, and trying to get them back to a stable place is really difficult. So I think, and we'll often hear people say, oh, everybody's impacted by a mental health issue now. And that this feeling that it's, people are over diagnosed. Well, we encourage early intervention because it is very, we'll hear things where somebody says, well, my daughter was a stellar student and everything was wonderful, and then she turned 18 and a light switch flipped. Well, it probably didn't. There were probably things that were happening that a parent couldn't figure out. Is this normal teenage hormonal stuff going on? Or is it something else? And without having anybody to talk to about that, with our primary care physicians not knowing anything about it, without, with people not wanting somebody to be diagnosed, and guess what? If you don't have a diagnosis, you can't get health insurance to pay for anything, right? And so really encouraging that early intervention and not being afraid of necessarily a diagnosis and some treatment makes the prognosis so much better. And one of the programs actually funded by the Women and Girls Fund back in 2018, I think it was, is Ending the Silence. And we are in so many schools now in Waukesha County with people with lived experience with a evidence-based 1-hour program that talks to them about what early symptoms look like, how to get help for themselves or a friend, does a little bit of suicide awareness and prevention, and puts the resources in their hands. And we absolutely know that's saving lives because it's giving them the language they need to talk to their parents, or talk to a physician, or talk to a trusted school counselor, or whatever it is. So the idea is that, these girls will be healthier as they grow because they are getting their needs met for what might be mild anxiety or mild depression, but they're not getting the message, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, you have nothing to be depressed about.
Just to follow up on that a bit, Mary, I know that as parents or grandparents or anyone associated with teenagers or preteens, there's this concern of overreacting. Your daughter comes home or your granddaughter mentions something that appears to be a mental health issue, and then there's this concern, is this a teenager, being a teenager, if you will. And so there is that concern of overreaction that you brought up. I've experienced it with my friends who have had these difficult conversations now about how to make sure that their children are being taken care of. Can you respond to that?
Sure, that is absolutely valid. And I look at my grandchildren and I think, the same thing is, we don't want to over treat, we don't want to over-diagnose, we don't want to over-medicate, certainly. And a lot of times, mild mental health issues, they don't need medication. They need, the individual might just need to understand some good coping skills, what good hygiene, sleep hygiene, and nutrition and exercise can do for them. So it's, some of those healthier things, limiting screen time and things like that. But what we usually do is we advise parents to start with your primary care physician, because primary care physicians, for the most part now, they didn't always used to have the knowledge. If you talk to them about mental health issues, they're like, okay, well, here's something to go see a psychiatrist, we'll make a referral. Well, now, if you need to get into a psychiatrist, it's going to take a really long time. So primary care physicians are doing wonders in terms of really kind of, looking at, are there root causes for this? Is this something that is beyond the range of what we would consider quote unquote normal? I don't really like to use that terminology, but obviously there is a range that they're looking at. And so, I think what's really important for parents and grandparents is to seek that additional, professional consult on it. Because I cannot tell you how many families over the years that we have supported or who are going to our Survivors of Suicide group because they had a child that said the word suicide and they didn't take it serious. Like, they didn't think they needed to take it seriously. And or, you know, there's still a lot of people that have that old kind of thought process that if somebody talks about suicide, it means they're not gonna do it. Or it's attention seeking. That is old thinking. If somebody is verbalizing anything about suicide or, you know, any kind of, you know, hints that that is what they're thinking, it needs to be taken seriously.
Thank you very much. And I hope that kind of segues into my next question as audience members, and not talking about financial contributions, but as all of us here in this room, Angela, I'll ask you to respond to this first. What can we do to help women and girls thrive?
Sure. Well, I would say, even piggybacking a little bit on the last question, is you need to believe someone when they disclose something that's happened to them. And as caring and compassionate humans, sometimes the first response is to immediately rattle off everything they should do. Now, should is profanity in our world, right? That's passing judgment on someone who may not be ready, but it's believing, and you know, even to the point about teens and parents, grandparents communicating, you know, in our world, that's backing it up before they're getting to NAMI. There's a trauma that they were exposed to or experienced. I mean, you know, Waukesha County, I don't know if we still have some of the highest ACEs scores, but when I started out here, the ACEs scores were really intense, and that was surprising.
Explain what ACEs is.
Oh, adverse childhood experiences, and you know, that's child abuse, child neglect, things like that. So, but you know, as far as what you can all do, again, aside from financial, is there is a growing tolerance for violence against women and girls. Growing and growing. It's actually appalling sometimes to me. I'm like, is this, what is happening here? And it's just getting worse. You know, when we have high schools that are bringing in, I don't know, a social media influencer who has a video of himself forcing a girl, and he says, rape is hilarious, and he gets thousands and thousands and thousands of likes. That's a problem, right? And we should be very mindful about watching any rights that are going to be stripped away from women and girls, because that's gonna affect everything that we're doing, everything that Women and Girls Fund is doing. So I would say, you know, really pay attention to those kinds of trends. But this might sound trite, but this tolerance of violence against women and girls in movies and video games and song lyrics, but of course in real life, every single day it's happening. How did rape become a joke? I need somebody to explain that to me, because it is absolutely the farthest thing from. So it's paying attention and don't accept any tolerance of this kind of violence or acceptance. That means you have to speak up, you have, you know, the see something, say something, but everybody in this room knows someone who has been sexually assaulted or abused as a child or been in a violent and abusive relationship. It is statistically implausible that you do not. So factor that in, you know, when you're, you know, you're hearing something or you see something, or even if it's a, I don't know, a billboard, any sort of messaging, you know, call them up. If that just sounds trite. This is really important though, because we've been around for 47 years and we just can't be, we don't have enough vocal cords at the Women's Center to do this. And so we need as much help as possible. So it's really, you know, aside from all of that, I would say it's finding your passion and your cause and diving in, just, you know, going for it, because that's really what, you know, social service agencies really need.
So the one thing that I will add, and maybe just a general comment and not necessarily tied to Girl Scouts, but tied to the topic, one, I do think financial matters, I'm just saying. No money, no mission. But also I would add to what Angela just said, and yes, you should absolutely believe if someone vocalizes to you that something has happened to them. But I think beyond that, if you are someone who is a part of a young person's life, male or female, watch for changes in behavior. Because if you have a child that historically has been a really good student and all of a sudden grades are slipping and maybe there are behavior issues at school, that's not just happening for no reason. Something may be causing that. And so that would be the one piece that I would add, is that if you see behavior that is like, why is this all of a sudden happening? Ask questions, because there may be some trauma that is happening or has happened, and it might be your responsibility to kind of figure out what's happening. And the other thing that I will add is that, unfortunately, statistically, most people that suffer abuse at the hands of someone that they know. It's not, the typical is usually friend, family, someone within their circle, not necessarily a stranger. And I think most people think it's a stranger, it's, that movie scene, violent, grabbed off the street, but, in many cases it might be stepdad or dad's friend or mom's friend, right? So just, again, don't be afraid to ask questions if you see changes in behavior.
There's no such thing as overreacting when it comes to trauma and abuse and patterns of behavior changing with children. Don't buy into that. There's no such thing as overreacting.
We're all mandatory reporters, so this is
Right.
gonna be like.
I'm just gonna add one more thing, then I'll pass the phone back to back to the moderator. In terms of from kind of a familial perspective, if you have somebody in your life, whether it's a child or an adult, that is impacted by a mental illness, that can be, kind of a really roller coaster ride in terms of, potentially being that person's caregiver. We've heard family members say, it's like I'm their case manager. I can't even have a family relationship with them anymore. It's always a fight. And I did get a really good piece of advice when my hair was on fire because of a child with mental health issues starting at 9 years old. And I was having a really tough time with her. And the really good piece of advice this therapist said was, you need to find a champion for this girl because you can't do it anymore. You are burnt out, so you're reacting to her poorly, which makes her react to you poorly, and you're just in this loop. And so I took that advice and talked to my mom about it, and my mom actually became her champion, and that gave me the opportunity to step back a little bit. And so as family members or friends, whoever you're supporting, sometimes you need to step back and say, and tag team with somebody else. So that you can continue to keep a positive relationship and remain, effective in helping that person with their recovery.
Okay, so to talk finance and contributions and money for a moment, then, all of us here in this room are contributors to the Women and Girls Fund, and very possibly directly to all of your organizations. How can we feel that our money is making a difference? Is there has been an impact?
Great question. So we talked about that kind of cookie program. So to talk finances for a little bit, that is about 50 to 60% of our revenue if you were to look at the entire pie chart. And so I would say that covers just basic operations, right? So just the overhead, which is good because a lot of times in philanthropy doesn't love to give, unrestricted funds to overhead. And so the rest of the mission work really comes from philanthropy. And I'll give a really good example. So everybody knows that we offer summer camps, and there's a charge for summer camp, for example, but what we charge for summer camp is probably 60% of the actual cost to run summer camp. So that is a deficit program. So even though parents are paying for their daughter to go to camp, it doesn't cover what the actual cost is. And so philanthropy makes up that difference, for example. And that is considering girls that are fully paying, right, for camp. Because then you also have families that need scholarship or need financial aid to attend, or else their girls couldn't, right? And so all of that is funded through philanthropy, and it's really important. And again, philanthropic dollars can also help to curate really unique experiences. So I, spoke it into the universe that I was like, I really want to take a group of girls to Washington, D.C. for or next year, because it's the 250th anniversary of our country, and it's going to be just an impactful time to be in our nation's capital. So for y'all that are young, if you're not a Girl Scout, you might want to sign up 2026. But we have the Herb Cole Foundation is fully funding our trip to Washington, D.C. for 50 girls. That is amazing, right? And so, but again, that can't happen without philanthropy. I might want it and I can speak it to the universe, but we do need that financial support. But again, from thinking about just civic engagement, what is that experience going to do for those 50 young women, right, moving forward? Like that is going to be impactful for them, and that is going to create our future voters and all of the things. And there's a reciprocal effect, right, because those girls may not, but may become mothers, right? Like, again, there's a legacy effect that happens there as well. So
I don't know about you all, but I kind of want to be a Girl Scout now. Yeah, it just looks so cool.
We have adult members.
For the Women's Center, how, for you, how do you know that you're having an impact? Is if our doors are open and our lights are on tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Because every single day we have brand new victims and survivors calling us and coming through our doors, adults and children, every single day. That's critically important. And for us to have our doors open and our lights on, shelters 24/7, 365, our hotline and our rape crisis response, 24/7, 365, never shut down. No blizzard, no pandemic, nothing shuts those three programs down. And that's really important, because sometimes a victim of domestic violence, for example, might have a 15-minute window that she can rip into our parking lot and talk to an advocate, maybe grab some formula, some food, things like that. It's a really quick one-on-one session, because her abuser is clocking her. She has to be home. She was given a 45-minute window and she, hurried up. I mean, this happens a lot. So it's really important that our doors are open and our lights are on, so that our advocates can be there, be their best selves for the next victim that comes through our doors.
And for NAMI, we actually 70 to 75% of the people we serve are women and girls. We're constantly reaching out to men and boys as well, but women typically are the people who seek mental health services first. So we'll have women dragging their husbands to classes and support groups and things like that. But we, as I reflected on, I mentioned a couple of different things: the Ending the Silence program, peer support. Our first grant from Women and Girls Fund was for peer support, and we hadn't had peer support at NAMI prior to this. And so it was NAMI Waukesha. We wanted to start a peer support program in Waukesha. And yesterday, actually, we had a staff meeting, and we now, half of our staff are certified peer specialists. That means they are living in recovery with their own mental illness. They've gone to a class, a state certified class. They've taken a certification. They do continuing education to keep it going. And so half of our 31 member staff are peer specialists, and we had a couple of them presenting about what is a peer specialist and how do you get to be a peer specialist and how do you keep well in your recovery. And I swear this was not a plant by me. One of our staff mentioned that the first time that she experienced peer support was in 2015 from NAMI, and it was the last time she was hospitalized. She had been being hospitalized 3 to 4 times a year prior to getting peer support. And 2015 is the year that we got the grant from you. And I thought, oh my gosh, and when I was looking at this, I thought, we used that money, and here is, you know, she's working now, providing peer support to other people. And so, you know, much like what Angela said, if we're providing services, you know, the philanthropy, the donations, the grants that we're getting, especially when we're writing them specifically for women and girls, that's, you know, a good majority of our population.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to open it up for Q&A now. So if you have any questions,